I remember the exact moment my world collapsed. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where the air is cool but the sunlight still carries a lingering warmth. I had just returned from running errands, my mind occupied with dinner plans and the usual household routines, when I noticed the way my husband, David, and my sister, Claire, exchanged glances. It wasn't a look of guilt. No, guilt is hesitant, nervous. This was something else, something settled, something decided. Claire took a slow breath and then said the words that would unravel everything. "Anna, I have to tell you something. David has been unfaithful." For a moment, I thought she was joking. My sister had always been dramatic, prone to exaggeration. But then I saw David's reaction. He didn't flinch, didn't stammer out a denial. Instead, he just exhaled deeply, rubbing a hand over his jaw as if preparing himself for the inevitable confrontation. I turned to him, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is this true?" David nodded once. I felt the ground beneath me shift, as if the very foundation of my life had crumbled. But before I could even begin to process the betrayal, Claire delivered the second, more devastating blow. "I love him, Anna." At first, I couldn't comprehend what she meant. Love him? How could she? How could she possibly say that to me? My own sister? The pieces clicked into place, one by one. Claire hadn't just exposed David's affair, she had been the affair. David packed his bags that evening. He didn't beg for forgiveness or try to explain himself. He simply left, walking out the door and into the arms of the woman I had trusted more than anyone else in the world. As the tail lights of his car disappeared down the street, something inside me shifted. The grief, the heartbreak, the confusion, those would all come later. Right now, there was only one thing I knew for certain. I would make Claire regret every single moment of this betrayal. In the days that followed, I existed in a fog. The silence of the house was deafening, each empty room a reminder of what had been taken from me. David had been my husband for 10 years. Claire had been my sister my entire life. And now, they were together. I didn't cry, not at first. I refused to give them that satisfaction. Instead, I moved through my days on autopilot, replaying every interaction I had missed, every sign I had ignored. The way Claire had always lingered a little too long when she visited. The way David had started locking his phone, claiming it was for privacy. The hushed conversations, the sudden changes in plans. How long had they been laughing behind my back? I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that they hadn't even tried to hide it in the end. Claire had looked me in the eye and told me the truth as if she were doing me a favor. As if she expected me to be grateful for her honesty. But there was one thing she had miscalculated. I wasn't the type to break down and beg. I wasn't the type to simply walk away and let them have their happy ending. If Claire wanted my life, she would have to earn it. I spent my nights awake, planning. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. About making sure Claire understood the depth of her betrayal in a way she would never forget. So, I started small. A carefully placed rumor here, a missing document there. I needed to get inside her world, to know exactly where to strike when the time was right. And when the time did come, Claire wouldn't see it coming. Not until it was too late. Revenge, I realized, is best served in layers. A single act of retaliation would never be enough. Claire had taken everything from me, my marriage, my trust, my sense of stability. She had to feel that same unraveling, piece by piece. I started with information. Claire was predictable in the way only a person who had never truly suffered could be. She flaunted her happiness with David as if daring me to react. Their relationship was no secret, she posted photos of them together, their smiles bright and unbothered. They were trying to make it seem effortless, as if their love was simply meant to be. But I knew better. No relationship built on betrayal could ever truly stand. I needed to find the cracks. So, I followed Claire's life the way an artist studies a blank canvas before beginning their masterpiece. I learned where she went for coffee, who she spoke to at work, what time she left the apartment she now shared with my husband. I even befriended a few of her acquaintances, nothing too obvious, just enough to gather useful details. And then, I found it. A weak spot. Claire had recently started a new job at an upscale marketing firm. She was eager to prove herself, constantly talking about a big project that would determine whether she earned a permanent position. She was under pressure, and pressure makes people careless. One of her coworkers, a woman named Lisa, mentioned in passing that Claire had secured the project by making some questionable promises to their boss. I smiled. That was all I needed. Using a fake email account, I drafted a carefully worded message to the firm's HR department. Nothing too direct, just enough to plant a seed of doubt. A concerned anonymous employee who had overheard Claire discussing unethical behavior. Would it get her fired? Maybe. Maybe not. But it would shake her foundation. The first step in reminding Claire that nothing in life is ever truly secure. It took 3 days for the first crack to appear. Claire's picture-perfect world had started to shake, though she didn't know I was the one holding the fault lines in my hands. I was at the grocery store when I got the first sign that my plan was working. As I rounded the corner near the dairy aisle, I saw her. She was on the phone, her voice sharp, her free hand gripping the handle of her cart with white-knuckled tension. "What do you mean HR wants to speak with me?" she snapped, pacing in front of the refrigerator section. "That's ridiculous, who even reported something like that?" I pretended to browse the shelves as I listened. Claire's tone was tight, her usual confidence cracking at the edges. I didn't promise him anything. I mean, God, I just said I'd do whatever it took to make the campaign a success. That doesn't mean what they're implying. A pause. "No, David, I didn't tell you because I didn't think it was a big deal. Now they're calling me in like I've done something wrong." I smirked to myself, picking up a carton of eggs I didn't need. So HR had taken the bait. Claire had always been ambitious, sometimes recklessly so. I knew she would flirt, charm, and push boundaries to get ahead, just as she had done with David. But she had never considered what might happen if someone turned the tables on her. I left the grocery store before she could see me, my heart pounding with satisfaction. The trap had been set, and she had walked right into it. But this was only the beginning. That evening, I took another step toward dismantling her world. Claire had taken my husband, so it only felt fair that I took something from her in return. Her peace of mind. She had always been particular about control, she liked things neat, ordered, predictable. It was why she had always been the golden child growing up, the one who never made mistakes, never failed. But everyone has their limits. I started with something simple. That night, while she and David were asleep in their new apartment, I left a small gift on their doorstep. A framed photo of David and me from our wedding day, carefully wrapped in brown paper. No note. No explanation. Just a reminder. The next morning, Claire called me. I let the phone ring out. She tried again. And again. By the third call, I finally picked up, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. "What do you want, Claire?" I could hear her breathing on the other end, fast and uneven. "Did you leave something at my door?" I let the silence stretch, savoring the way her voice wavered. "Why would I do that?" I asked, feigning confusion. Claire hesitated. "Because you're upset." I laughed softly. "Upset? No, Claire. I've accepted things. I just hope you and David are happy together." Another silence. "Anna," she started, but I hung up before she could say anything else. Let her wonder. Let her stew in her own paranoia. This was what she deserved. And I wasn't done yet. I didn't have to wait long for the next crack to appear. 2 days after our phone call, I received a text from an unknown number. The words on the screen were simple, but the feeling behind them was clear. She was panicked, unsure, reaching out because the walls were closing in on her. I knew exactly who it was. I considered ignoring it, but there was something about her vulnerability that made it impossible to resist. I asked her who she was, playing coy, feigning ignorance. After a pause, the reply came, raw with emotion. She admitted the things that were happening were beyond her control, the consequences of everything she had done beginning to surface. I let her stew in the silence. I could feel the desperation coming through the screen, the frustration, the helplessness. It was clear, she wasn't in control anymore. And that made every bit of this even sweeter. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't offer answers. I simply reminded her, in my most neutral tone, that David was the one she had chosen. The one she had betrayed me for. If she was struggling now, maybe it was time to face the reality of what she had done. A couple of days later, I received an unexpected message from Rachel, Claire's old friend. Their friendship had fallen apart years ago, but it seemed that Rachel had been watching the whole drama unfold from a distance. She had always disliked Claire's ability to manipulate people, and now, it seemed she was ready to do something about it. When we met for coffee, Rachel didn't waste time. She made it clear she knew about Claire's situation and implied she knew exactly what I was doing. I didn't confirm or deny it, but I didn't need to, she already knew. Rachel slid her phone across the table. I glanced down, and my heart stopped. On the screen were messages between Claire and another man, someone named Nick. These weren't just friendly catch-ups. They were flirty. Late-night messages, promises to meet for drinks, casual insinuations. Claire had betrayed David, too, with someone else. The realization hit me hard. The woman who had torn my world apart, who had taken my husband, had been unfaithful to him as well. I felt a surge of triumph, but it was quickly followed by a cold, calculating calmness. David had thrown away everything for Claire, and yet, she had been playing him all along. But now, there was something even bigger at play. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about making sure David knew the truth. The moment I learned Claire was cheating on David, everything changed. Until now, I had been the one on the receiving end of betrayal, watching my marriage fall apart while they paraded their happiness without a second thought. But now, the balance had shifted. I wasn't just a woman scorned anymore, I held the truth in my hands, and truth had power. I spent the next few days gathering every piece of evidence I could. Rachel, delighted to see Claire's downfall set in motion, sent me screenshots of conversations, locations where Claire had met Nick, and even the time she had seen them together at a small restaurant across town. I compiled it all, carefully, methodically. There was no need to rush. This had to be perfect. David had chosen Claire over me, believing she was worth the destruction of a marriage. It was only right that he see her for who she truly was before he wasted any more of his life on her. I planned my move carefully. Dropping hints, leaving traces, ensuring David would come across the truth without it seeming like I had orchestrated it. He wouldn't believe it if it came from me directly, he would assume it was some twisted form of revenge. But if he found out another way, if he stumbled upon the truth as if by accident, it would shake him to his core. I made sure he did. A strategically forwarded email, an anonymous message, a picture slipped into his work locker. All pieces of a puzzle that he would have no choice but to put together. It didn't take long. One evening, as I sat by my window sipping tea, I saw the result of my carefully placed traps unfold. David stormed out of their apartment, his movements rigid with anger. He was gripping his phone so tightly, I thought he might crush it in his hand. Claire followed after him, trying to stop him, her hands reaching out in desperation. He pulled away from her touch. She was speaking rapidly, pleading, but he wasn't listening. The betrayal was now hers to bear. I watched as he got into his car, slammed the door shut, and sped away, leaving her standing alone on the pavement. She turned, looking up and down the street, as if searching for an answer, for some way to fix the mess she had created. But there was none. I should have felt satisfaction. And I did, in part. But as I watched her shoulders slump, watched the way she cradled her face in her hands as if trying to hold herself together, something in me softened. Not because I forgave her, but because, in that moment, I realized how fragile she really was. Claire had always wanted more attention, more validation, more love. But she never knew how to hold on to it. She had burned everything down in pursuit of happiness, and now she stood in the ashes, alone. I turned away from the window. This wasn't my problem anymore. She had made her choice. And now, she would live with it. The fallout of Claire's betrayal was swift and merciless. David didn't return to their apartment that night. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned he had checked into a hotel, refusing to see or speak to her. Claire, once so confident in her control over him, was now left scrambling, trying to salvage what she had destroyed. The messages started coming in, not from David, but from Claire. At first, they were laced with desperation. She tried to explain, to insist that it wasn't what it seemed. Then, as her attempts to reach David failed, the tone of her messages shifted. She accused me, saying this had my fingerprints all over it. She was right, of course. But I didn't respond. I knew she was unraveling, and that was enough for now. It wasn't just David who abandoned her. Her job, already hanging by a thread from the HR investigation, finally let her go. I heard from Rachel that Claire had been called into a meeting, where the allegations against her were reviewed in detail. No proof had surfaced of her offering favors in exchange for career advancement, but the mere implication of it had been enough to ruin her credibility. The company decided she was more trouble than she was worth. By the end of the week, she had lost both her position and her reputation. I could only imagine the weight of it all pressing down on her. No husband, no job, no security. Everything she had fought so hard to take from me had slipped through her fingers. One evening, I drove past their apartment, curious to see if she was still there. The blinds were drawn, but the dim glow of a single lamp told me she was inside. Sitting alone in a space she had once filled with stolen laughter and whispered promises. I wondered if she thought about me now. If she finally understood what she had done. I should have felt triumphant. But instead, I felt something else, something unexpected. Pity. Claire had been selfish, cruel, reckless, but she had also been lost. Perhaps she had convinced herself that taking David would bring her happiness, that ruining my life would somehow make hers better. But standing outside that building, watching the hollow remnants of what she had left, I knew she had only destroyed herself in the process. I had won. But strangely, victory didn't taste as sweet as I thought it would. The days passed, and Claire's world continued to shrink. I watched from a distance, no longer needing to intervene. She was undoing herself now. The desperate phone calls to David went unanswered. The messages she sent to friends were ignored. Bit by bit, she was becoming exactly what she had made me feel in those first few weeks after the betrayal: isolated, abandoned, forgotten. David, once blinded by whatever spell she had cast over him, had moved out of their apartment entirely. Rumors spread quickly. He was seen at bars alone, staying late at work, avoiding questions. He was lost, but unlike me, he had no one to help him pick up the pieces. I imagined him lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how he had gotten here. Had it been worth it? Had throwing away his marriage for Claire led him to something better? The answer was clear. It had led him to nothing. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't need to. He was already drowning in his own regret, and I wasn't about to offer him a lifeline. Claire, on the other hand, tried once more to breach the silence between us. One evening, as I was leaving work, I found her waiting for me outside. She looked nothing like the woman who had stood in my home weeks ago, so sure of herself as she revealed her affair. Her hair was unkempt, her face pale, dark circles shadowing her eyes. She had lost weight. It wasn't surprising, stress had a way of eating people alive. I stopped a few feet away, waiting for her to speak. She hesitated before finally taking a breath. She told me she was sorry. That she hadn't meant for things to turn out this way. That she had loved David, but she had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I listened in silence. She said she missed me. That we were sisters before all of this, and maybe, one day, we could be again. I let her finish before I answered. I told her she had made a choice, and choices had consequences. I told her that forgiveness wasn't something she could ask for like a favor, it was something earned, something that might never come at all. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not this time. She had made her bed, and now she was lying in it. Alone. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the cold. She didn't call after me. She knew better than to try. The next day, I received an email from David. It was short, direct. He admitted he had been wrong. That he had thrown away the best thing in his life for something fleeting, something meaningless. That he had been selfish, blind, and now, he was left with nothing. He said he missed me. That he wanted to talk. For a long time, I just stared at the words on the screen. It was everything I had once wanted to hear. But reading it now, it didn't stir anything in me. Because I had already moved on. I closed the email without responding. Some things didn't deserve a second chance. I never responded to David's email. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had already said everything that mattered, with my silence, with my actions, with the life I had begun to rebuild without him. There was a time when I would have given anything to hear him admit his mistake, to have him crawl back, asking for forgiveness. But now that he had, I felt nothing but indifference. He had broken me once. I wouldn't let him do it again. Claire stopped trying to contact me after our last encounter. Maybe she finally understood that some wounds don't heal with time, that some betrayals are simply too deep to be forgiven. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had moved out of the apartment she had once shared with David, unable to stay in the space where everything had fallen apart. Where she had once walked with her head high, reveling in the life she had stolen, she now slunk away, avoiding the whispers, the judgment, the loneliness that came with it. She had lost everything. Her job. Her lover. Her friends. And worst of all, me. She may have taken David from me, but I had taken far more from her. Her security. Her reputation. Her ability to manipulate her way into something better. There was a sense of satisfaction in knowing she had finally felt what it was like to be abandoned, to be cast aside like she had once done to me. But revenge, I realized, was not the cure I had expected it to be. It had given me control, had allowed me to turn the pain she had inflicted back onto her, but it hadn't erased the past. It hadn't made me forget the nights I spent alone, questioning my own worth, wondering how the two people I trusted most could betray me so easily. What it had done, however, was set me free. I no longer felt the weight of what had happened pressing down on me. I no longer woke up with anger in my chest, bitterness on my tongue. I had let go of them, not in forgiveness, but in finality. David and Claire were nothing to me now. They were simply mistakes I had survived. Months passed, and life continued to move forward. I poured myself into my work, into rediscovering the things I had once loved before my world had been shattered. I traveled, I reconnected with old friends, I laughed again, real, unforced laughter that felt like a small victory each time it escaped my lips. One day, as I was walking through the city, I spotted David. He was sitting alone at an outdoor cafe, a cup of coffee in front of him, his gaze distant. There was a sadness in his posture, a weariness in the way he held himself. He looked up briefly, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was no hatred in my heart. No anger. No desire to see him suffer. He had already lost, just as Claire had. I simply gave him a small nod before turning away, continuing on my path without another glance. That was the last time I ever saw him. One evening, as I sat by my window with a book in my lap and a cup of tea in my hands, I realized something profound. I was happy. Not in the way I had once been, blindly believing in the security of love, in the permanence of relationships. But in a new way, a stronger way. I had faced the worst kind of betrayal and come out of it not just alive, but whole. And that, I decided, was the greatest revenge of all. I no longer needed to look back. Because the future was finally mine. The end.